Hello. I wonder what you're like at your Mr. Men. There's all sorts of different ones on the back. I wonder how many you could recognise, but I'm not going to test you on that. But I do wonder if you could recognise who I've drawn here, which of the Mr. Men that I've got here. No, it's not Mr. Worry. Mr. Worry's a bit shorter with hair and got a red nose. It's, yeah, Mr. Mean. Usually we will get to, but actually it's not Mr. Mean, it's his twin brother. And this is the clever bit where I take my black paintbrush on and I paint yellow letters. So let's see if you can work out who this is. It is Mr. There we go, S-E-L. Mr. Selfish. Now, Mr. Selfish is actually Mr. Mean's twin brother, and he's twice as mean and twice as selfish as his twin brother, Mr. Mean. I tell you how selfish he was. When he was at school, he would come to school with his pockets bulging with a big bag of sweets, and he would eat all of them all by himself. He wouldn't share them with anybody at all. But worse than that, if he heard somebody rustling a sweet packet on the other side of the playground, he would go rushing over and grab them and say, "Give me a sweet or else." Now, I don't think you'd like somebody like that as a friend with you. No, nobody really wants anybody like that as a friend. But Mr. Selfish, you know what? He didn't care whether he had any friends, so long as he had lots of sweets. Well, that's how Mr. Selfish grew up, really mean, really selfish. When he left school, he decided he wanted to get a job with loads and loads of money because he wanted to get really rich. And in those days, the way that you could get really rich was to become a tax collector and collect the taxes for the government from the people. And in those days, you see, you could be, well, frankly, you could be dishonest, and you could sort of add a little bit on. And the other really great thing about being a tax collector is you've got a couple of big bodyguards. And so this is the way that it worked. Mr. Selfish would work out in his book how much somebody owed. He would go up and knock on the door. And then when it was opened, he would say, "Now then, I'm from the government, I've come to collect your taxes. You owe the government £30. No, I don't. I don't owe £30. I've got it worked out. It's £20. It's £30 now. Pay up or else. And at that point, the two big bodyguards would step forward. And he'd have to pay. Mr. Selfish would go back down the path and chuckle into himself, thinking, "Oh, this is great. There's £20 I'm going to put into that pocket, that's for the government, and £10 I'll put into this pocket, and that's for me." And there's a word for that, isn't it? We call it stealing. Yeah, I hope you don't steal. Because I know that people do. They don't, end up robbing banks or start off robbing banks at least. But sometimes, like, people come home from school and they come in and say, Mum, I'm really hungry. Can I have a biscuit?" And Mum says, "Well, it's nearly tea time, but you can have just one biscuit." And then you go to the tin and you take the lid off and, "Mum's been shopping. There's all my favourites. There's Jammy Dodgers. There's ones with the cream in the middle. There's the chocolate covered ones. Oh, Mum, how many did you say I can have?" "Just one, otherwise it will spoil your appetite." "Oh no, I don't know, but how am I gonna..." "I know what I'll do. I'll take one for now, and I'll take one for later, and I'll stick it in my pocket." And that's stealing as well, isn't it? One of the things about stealing is you pretty much always get caught and found out sooner or later, especially if you put the chocolate biscuit in your pocket. Well, that was how Mr. Selfish grew up, and he did make loads of money. He became very rich. He bought the best house in the whole of the town. His house was full of wonderful things, but he didn't really have any friends because of the way that he'd lived. Well, one day he was in his house and he was sort of enjoying all his nice things and he was counting his money when he heard outside something that looked a little bit like this. Just that clever bit where we take two brushes this time and do this. because right outside his house, going past, was a great big crowd of people. Can you recognise the crowd? Ah, that's because they haven't put heads on, of course, so let's just give them some heads so they look. Give them some feet as well, maybe some arms. There we go, that's better, isn't it? Well, Mr. Selfish, I wonder what's going on. I wonder where they're all going. I think I'd better go out and have a look. And so he went out to have a look. And do you know what? When he got out there, he couldn't get anywhere near what was going on because there was a great big crowd gathering around something, but he couldn't work out what it was because, you see, Mr. Selfish was rather small. Now he's trying to do what maybe you do when you're trying to get to the front of a crowd, because you've got a little, you can duck and dive and weave in and out of people until you get to the front, can't you? Well, Mr. Selfish began to do that. But you know, when everybody realised who it was trying to get through, do you think they were going to let him get through to the front? No. In fact, what they did was they all stood really close together like this, shoulder to shoulder, and their arms accidentally, on purpose, slipped and went boom, and their feet as well just slipped and went crack. And Mr. Selfish began to feel really, oh, it's not fair, I won't let me go through and nobody likes me and I haven't got any friends and oh, it's not fair, I wish I'd been really nice to people and I wish I'd shared with people and I wish I hadn't stolen and lied and cheated and all those other things that kind of separate me from everybody and mean I haven't got any friends and oh, I wish I... Then he had a bright idea. Quickly, he went back, out the back gate of his house. He went down the garden, through the gate, and went down the little jitty way, and then went kind of around the block a couple of times until eventually he came to a great big tree. And Mr. Selfish was thinking to himself, if that crowd continue on the same direction, then they're going to come underneath this tree. So he climbed up the tree and sat there waiting to see if the crowd would come his way. There he is. Well, he sat there in his tree, watching and waiting, and sure enough, sooner or later, the crowd began to come down the road. And as he sort of looked from where he was, he could see that right in the middle was somebody that was, well, it's actually somebody really quite famous, somebody really very important, somebody that everybody wanted to get to see, not because they were a celebrity on the television or something, but this was somebody even more important than that. Somebody who did amazing things and said amazing things. Somebody that kind of healed people and even brought people back to life. Have you guessed who it is? Yes, Jesus. Jesus was in the middle. Mr. Selfish thought to himself, oh, yeah, maybe Jesus is coming to my house. He wants to come to my house for tea. He's heard how famous I am. He's heard how rich I am. He's heard how wonderful my house is. He's heard how my house is full of wonderful things. Oh no. Hang on a minute, though, he thought to himself. Oh dear. Yeah. Jesus also goes around telling people off for being selfish and mean and all those things, and tells them that they should turn to God and turn over a new life, and oh dear, what am I going to do? The crowd, I better paint the crowd in, hadn't I? As they came down the road. Some of them looked up to where Mr. Selfish was, sat in his tree. And I said, hey mister, that's a great idea. Can we come up there? Can we come and share your tree? No, go away. It's my tree. I'm not going to share my tree with anybody. You see, he really was Mr. Selfish. But as Jesus began to get closer and closer, he thought, I'm really worried actually that maybe Jesus is going to tell me off, and I know what I'll do. Maybe I just sit here really quiet and Jesus won't know that I'm here. And that's a bit daft really, isn't it? Because I mean, we know that Jesus is God the Son, and Well, he knows everything about us, doesn't he? He knows where we are, what we do. He knows all the good things that we do, and he knows all the bad things that we do. So Mr. Selfish decided that he would sit really, really quiet, and maybe, just maybe, Jesus wouldn't know he was there. And as Jesus got closer and closer and closer, Mr. Selfish sat stiller and stiller and stiller, until eventually Jesus was right down below, and Mr. Selfish was sat there really still, holding his breath, and suddenly, Zacchaeus! He almost fell out of his tree, because there, below him, looking up at him, was Jesus. And Jesus looked at him and said, Zacchaeus, come on down, because I want to come to your house for tea. Mr. Selfish couldn't believe it. Jesus knew his real name. Nobody had called him Zacchaeus for years. Everybody called him Mr. Selfish for obvious reasons. But he kept scrambling down the tree. And he said, move out of the way, move aside, I'm a very important person, move aside. Jesus wants to come to my house for tea, now move out the way. Now, I better paint them in, haven't I? We don't really know what Jesus said to Zacchaeus. And we don't know what Zacchaeus said to Jesus. But we do know what happened next. Because you see, after Jesus had gone, Zacchaeus came out of his house and he sold loads and loads of his really fine things, and he gave all that money to the poor. And he announced to all the crowd of people that were still stood outside his house, he said, look, if I've stolen anything from you, I'm going to give you back 4 times as much as I stole. So, if he'd stolen £10 from somebody, he was going to give them back £40. And if he'd stolen £50 from somebody, he was going to give them back £200. And if he'd stolen £1,716.43, he was going to give them back, well, quite a lot of money. But, more than that, Jesus did something that was really, really amazing and really special. Because Zacchaeus, Mr. Selfish, had changed completely, well, he gave him a new name. And from now on, instead of everybody calling him Mr. Selfish, everybody was going to call him this. This was the new name that Jesus gave to Mr. Selfish, to Zacchaeus. He gave him a new name and called him Mr. Special. But you think, well, how could Jesus do that? How could Jesus take somebody as mean and selfish as Mr. Selfish was and sort of change them so much that everybody would call them Mr. Special? Well, the reason is because Jesus himself was going to do something very special in just a little while later on. Jesus was going to allow himself to be arrested and to be put to death on a cross. Not because he'd done anything wrong to deserve to die there as a criminal, but he was punished for all the wrong things that Mr. Selfish had done and said and thought. And not just Mr. Selfish, but all of us, you and me. So that anybody, if we want to, just like Mr. Selfish, just like Zacchaeus had done, if any of us would turn to Jesus, say that we're sorry, ask him to forgive us, that he will forgive us, and he will clean us up, and he will give us a new, not necessarily a new name, but he will give us a new kind of meaning to life and a new way of living. You see, he didn't stay dead. 3 days later, the Bible tells us that Jesus came back to life. 6 weeks later, he went back to be with God in heaven. And because he's in heaven, we can come to him in our prayers, and he will send the Holy Spirit down to be with us, to help us to live a new life, living that life for God and for Jesus. I want to say thank you for listening to my story, and if you'd like to learn how to do a special lettering, it's called ladder lettering, then there's 2 videos on my channel. You can look at those. One is called Basic Ladder Lettering, the other one is called Ladder Lettering 2, and it will teach you how to do them, how to use colours, etc. So if you've enjoyed my story, please look at the other videos on about ladder lettering. Please also look at some of the other stories, and please do like them and also share them with other people that you think might like them as well. Thank you.